Hello everyone, today we talk about a topic that in its past recurrences I deeply and honestly felt for, but that I never had the force to address on Schwerpunkt for reasons that I'm going to explain partly. And naturally, today it's not a random day, and not just for the day of the year, but properly for the same year. After 20, the world objectively changed, and it's really remarkable how an event that didn't take place in your country, but that still, of course, affected you and your connationals, right? If we can, let's say, you know, stand in as the first, most important one in your perception, like live perception of the historical events that objectively have the greatest relevance, the greatest meaning, the greatest importance, and that impacted you so deeply like this one. And I know it sounds almost cliche when talking about 9/11 and saying, everybody remembers when we were at that time, what we were doing. Like if you talked about the day before, you wouldn't even remember, of course, but that day and also the days after, because those were quite important and had it showed something that I believe is much greater than what happened on that day by scale, right? And that is part of the reason, actually, yes, the main reason why I want to address this topic today. And today, as of course not the coincidence, the temporal coincidence, but also given the 20 years of history that have passed and what has happened, especially increasingly, I would say, to this day in the world, naturally in the countries that have been more affected by the event, and in that also suffered of its consequences, broadly meant, also indirectly. And we know that these have been 20 years of war, right? And I discuss military history, as you know, and now I'm taking a relatively short pause, uploading more general content, but we'll come back propotently on not just on Clausewitz here, properly on some strategic analysis and a broader, properly military background that this channel shall have. And I think that it's a moral duty to address this topic, this point, for a number of reasons that I think we all experience, that we all observe every day, that from many perspectives, as many as our lives can differ and our backgrounds can differ, our stories can differ, but that seem to be very, seem to have come on the fore much more consistently in the last years, and a lot has to do with it. It's difficult for me to start addressing these issues without remembering that day, which you may not be interested, like in my own perception. But I think that that can explain you also why I'm actually talking about this. At the time I was a kid, and maybe it's a coincidence, but let's say eventually when I had to age up or to become an adolescent, etc., in the following years, I went through a different moment in my life that was naturally more pressuring, more in which you interiorize more, you change, right? At that point I was still a kid in a sense, and but as you understand, also old enough to realize that not just what happened that day, but fundamentally what the world, and to remember well actually what the world was before that, right? My childhood has been very very happy, right? I have a very positive memory of my childhood. Never had any problem, like in my life in general. I never had any serious issue. I've been consistently lucky, and when also such things happen, let's say, the reason why this struck me probably is also because I came from a positive background, and I could concentrate. I was privileged, let's say, in perspective also to realize certain things. And of course, I wouldn't understand completely the full implication of the story. But let's say what strikes me still to this day is that positive atmosphere that in the 90s had a bit characterized the West. It was already a moment of slowing down. There was the sense that the apex of the West maybe had reached a sort of in fact of peak indeed, but that also there were some problems emerging, that not everything was completely right, but there was this impression that after all the West had made it, right. It had managed to defeat tyranny, World War II. The relics of communism fundamentally had been destroyed. The West had won the Cold War. The Westerners had become rich, right, prosper, educated. There didn't seem to there would be the emerging countries on the horizon, saying there would be a process of gradual development. Things went much more quickly, and fortunately so, because in the last 20 years, in spite of all, the world topped all, in absolute terms, all the basically the greatest advancement, quality of life improvement, wealth increase, etc., in the whole history of mankind, unprecedented. Right, and from a Western perspective, things are different in relative terms, because naturally we were the ones who arrived first, and that consolidated further, and are still, let's say, on the lead, way or another. And this aspect is crucial. The things I want to address today, because it entails all a series of moral and strategical considerations that are crucial for our future, and that pass dramatically through 9/11, and I can't of all the fact, it was the same before, it was all the historical events that happened in my lifetime, right? This was not just the most impacting from an emotional point of view, even though at the moment seemed like this novelty. You're a kid, you don't quite, but you perceive certain things. I will clarify this better, but properly you could use this as a watershed, right, of a relative, a perceived decline, right, and worsening, if you want better, than that the West perceived about itself, right, and what happened also relatively to itself, to the rest of the world at the same time. And it's difficult to even explain this. I know that there are most of you are Americans, so what I'm saying probably touches you the most in regarding, especially to 9/11 itself. There are people that surely listen from other countries where actually far worse things have happened, right, dramatically, and also as a consequence of 9/11, and that therefore quite perceive things in not necessarily, and obviously in a different way, but not necessarily in agreement or disagreement with certain worldviews, etc. This is secondary, right? The video is not intended to address it, because I have a universal moral standard, right, and I don't believe that certain things can be equivocated in full honesty, right, and therefore what I'm saying, it's what I think personally, but I think I speak from the standpoint of somebody that cared about cares about fairness, so that I can make mistakes, I can make misassessments, wrong evaluations. I'm open to recognize any mistake, but I have my own opinion, and if I have my opinion, you can be sure that I've been thinking about it, right, and that it's quite difficult to make me change it at that point, not because I'm not open to other ideas, but because I've been listening to other ideas for a long time, and I think that they haven't brought anywhere. And in fact, I realize this is a sensitive topic. I'm surely gonna get some, unsubscription, and and dislike. Surely not. I don't think from the United States, because as you will see now, I generally have a positive bias towards what the U.S. do. I'm not what you can call a philo-American, because I don't need to be philo or an anti-something, right? I like generally every country in the world. From a scientific standpoint, I'm interested in every culture, in every people, in every belief. I study, for these humanistic subjects, and I like to understand things rather than judging them. But that comes unavoidable, right? At some time, to properly, have a moral, to hierarchize morally what happens, right? You have to properly say, okay, this doesn't sound particularly good, but it's not out of contempt towards another culture per se, right, or another belief per se, but just what single individuals believe and why, right? Because we have the means to sort out why people think certain things, and therefore, the more you know, the more you can understand why they do, which is a way to hopefully find a way to fix the problem and not to blame just for, of course, also the irresponsibility, the crime, the enormous lack of contempt, as you understand, for human life, for democracy, for science, for what I think it's the goodness of human reason that stands in the values of civilization that I deeply recognize in the West, and to which I belong. In that I think as such as universal, right? So that there is not a stamp that says, "Wow, this is now made in wherever," right? We all learn from each other, and the history of civilization passed through so many different from everybody, right? From any people in the world. But naturally, even the fact that some made more than others doesn't mean that should be a process of glorification or demonization from the other side. It's simply how things happen, and it would be much better if we studied how it happened and recognizing how things are without making moral relativism, right? And because I'm definitely very distant from that, and I think that in fact there is today, especially after what happened after Afghanistan, a sense of defeatism that I addressed on multiple occasions in Schwerpunkt, because I consider it as anti-civilizational, anti-moral, and anti-strategical, right? It's a sense of, it's an emotional reaction, right? It's not real. I made a video on the relativity of victory and defeat, right? Which doesn't mean you can erase what happened, right? Today, even in this picture, I wanted to insert the World Trade Center with a beautiful picture before 9/11, because believe me, that was beautiful. It was a symbol of the same world. In fact, I feel to belong to, with the same values I feel to belong to, and at the same time, I said, this doesn't have to be about just how it was at the time. This has to be how it is now, right? So I tried to convey these messages to say we all wish we could forget painful moments, right? Those that really mark us and that we wish we had not lived. And we all have some. We all have something that tears us up, right, in our lives. And I must confess this, that I'm a pretty, let's say, I'm not a cold person, but maybe it's because of my job and, studying bloodshed, in all history of mankind, and having watched consistently pictures of gore, of corpses, of blood, of all the worst thing you can imagine, and growing desensitized to that specifically, right? Because it's, after all, it's reality, and that it works, in ways you can't explain, and it's all, let's say, part of the many people are naturally very sensitive to this. They can't watch even, I don't know, think about the jumpers, right? And that's something that objectively, when you look at, right, it's very I have mostly an observing, and I admit I get fascinated with it. Like I get fascinated with the tragedy of a person that literally kills him or herself in something that, in fact, it's difficult. It's rare to find, even in military history. Normally, people kill each other, right? Maybe carry out genocide, but they're always killing someone else. It's powerful to see somebody that kills oneself without wanting to die, either, right? It's something terrifying, and I understand that this is the source naturally of so much pain and devastation. Today I will not say something like, let's spend 60 seconds in silence in the video for the victims of 9/11. I think that thinking about that and cherishing their memory as well as the one of any other person that in a way or another was connected with all what happened in these 20 years and lost their lives or suffered or had not everything they had, right? Is up to ourselves, right? This we do in our private life. I don't need to do it here. I'm not going to invest on that. But I genuinely believe that what happened that day can help us, and the same pain can help us, motivating us for not simply, you have to look at the past. I hate that phrase. You have to look at the past so that you can avoid repeating the same mistakes of the past, right? This is something that, as a historian, I completely loathe as an interpretation of history. Like, it means basically thinking that in history there are things that repeat themselves, so that basically you can deresponsibilize yourself about what is going right now, right? Instead, then cheaply kind of drawing parallelisms between things that are always different in history. You can't, and that the thing is what really makes the difference is what you do now, right? For those people who died that day, there's nothing we can do to bring them back. What happened in the last 20 years, there is nothing that we can do at this moment to have change it, right? But what we can change is what we do now, right? I remember that day was here, like, so it was in the afternoon, right? So while it was in the morning in the United States, and here it was. I was playing. I don't remember exactly. It was toys, child. I don't remember that I was making. I had a bunch of, I think, of sheet of paper or things like Depliant, things like that I don't know, maybe my father brought from work, or was from, I don't know if it was from one of our vacations that summer, and I was alone with my father, and I was playing in my room, and my father was watching TV in the living room, and I remember, because in our house, like, I always liked silence. Also, as an only son, I have always heard, listened more than else, and I think from TV in the living room I had already sensed there was something going on, that also my father was consistently there, silently watching, and I think my father came passing by in the hall, told me, look, there's been this thing, like there's some planes crashed in New York's skyscraper. At that time, I honestly wouldn't even know that the Twin Towers existed as such. I mean, I surely had watched them, but I was a kid. I wouldn't know what they were, what buildings were, etc. And that sounds, like, what the hell do you know then about what happened? Well, of course, we learn things. We grow up, and that was a hard way of growing up. And in fact, I think I went there watching this scenario that I said. I think I went a few seconds or so. It was before any of the either of the two towers collapsed. I think it was before the second plane hit, and so I remember the smoke, the landscape, and the shock. Like, I remember from journalists that also I listened to every day on TV, or my parents, or in the kitchen, we listen to it. That the astonishment, that is to say, this is surreal, right? It's unbelievable. It's not just a matter. It wasn't just a matter. Some accident had happened, right? In the 90s, also the TV was kind of wilder for certain things. Everything, negatives, tragedies, things that would be spectacularized, etc. This one was just journalists staying silent, or murmuring something, or simply not even knowing what to say, because at the time, by the way, it was, there was much less like communications were less, like without social networks and all this. There were less info being pumped into streaming, arriving scattered, because also nobody kind of understood what had happened consistently. I remembered that, and then I went back at my room playing, and a bit ashamed of that, but I think those deeply I made some kind of building, falling down, because I wouldn't. I was a child, right? That's I'm sorry for the insensitivity. In fact, I was excited about many things as a kid. I would do this thing then, but I was like, I understood that was seriously bad news, right? It wasn't something to laugh about, for something very serious. Maybe at the beginning I wouldn't understand naturally the magnitude of the thing from a political point of view, from obviously the consequences just where we live now, because at the time, you remember that even in following days there was everything was alert, because they feared there would be other attacks, something chemical. There was a great alert and a great sense of suspension, like suspense, like that is to say, what the hell is going to happen now? What it's going to be? And I remember my mother was at work at that point, and as she called home, I understood what she was saying through my father's answers, and I realized she was upset, because my father is the kind of guy that doesn't quite express much his emotions. He was evidently impressed by it, but he wouldn't start complaining, etc. My mother is more sensitive and a bit like me, and when she came back from work, I don't remember that, but I immediately realized she was seriously upset. And she was upset because I would realize that she understood, of course, what had happened, and she was thinking that I would have had to live in a world where this would happen, right? And that's something that I guess just parents can understand, but as their child, you can't sense deeply. And my mother was deeply impressed by that, and I felt mostly through her what was the thing. Actually, I remember I went to my grandparents' house with my father that afternoon, because normally he would visit them. They were close, like 300 meters away. He took me with him, and I remember also with my grandparents there in front of the TV, and that was when I think I saw I think both towers collapsing. I think they hadn't not one had fallen before, so it was even worse, because the thing went as you remember, from like in those moments, like you're already deeply impressed, and the thing goes unavoidably worse and down, and amazingly so. I remember the moment the second plane hit. I remember distinctly that, and that was also pretty scary, right? Because at the beginning it said it was a plane, but nobody had filmed that, or at least on TV at that point it wasn't shown. The second one, you saw the freaking plane entering the tower, and so I was really impressed by that. And then I came back home again with my father. Then my mother arrived, and I remember mostly the following days in the news. And my mother kept being very upset, very impressed, and she wasn't much scared by it. She was just anxious, because again, she would think, what kind of world is this, that next time you take a plane, I had beautiful memories from plane travels the years before. I was to Paris and London by plane, and I remember distinctly it was the moment in which the crew would pick a kid and say, do you wanna watch the cockpit? I wanna see there. And I remember with my mother, we were heading to London, and we were just a moment we were flying over Paris. And the pilots, which I don't remember what company that was, were probably British, and they told us, look down there, you can't see Paris. I honestly saw just clouds down because there wasn't, but it's beautiful, right? And something when I travel by plane is like, of course, I love to take pictures from always from the window, and I right, one of those things I know that I will not be allowed to enter a cockpit anymore. Last time I remember I was stuck because there was a row in the plane. Last time I stopped in front of the cockpit while the cabin was open, and I loved all the instrumentation, all the stuff, and I was very fascinated with it and remembered those moments. So naturally, everything changed from there on, and it was a sense of beauty, of freedom, of liberty to enjoy that. You see, it's these things, these detail that make you remember being properly like what the West was before, right? Enjoying this idea of freedom, of well-being, right? Of happiness, even of opulence, if you want, of things. Okay, this world is free. You can travel, you can go anywhere. You're happy. Of course, there had been other problems like I don't know. My country in the 70s, from the 60s, came from, I don't know, like most Western European countries, from black and red terrorism. There were surely issues with security things, but let's say, you see, in perspective, this is the point. Everything seemed brighter in the future because we felt that we were getting there, and that nobody could stop that. Right, I remember also from I was interested in scientific stuff, even in a sort of sense. This idea that there would be always an improvement, right? That by this point, of course, we should have already been to Mars, and that we would eat pills rather than cooking food, and everything would be to the top. Those were ridiculous expectations of objectively, and they also contributed eventually to quite define my more correctly. I definitely think that all the time I complain against technologistic or modernistic or progressistic stereotypes. I refer in part to that I fell into when I was a kid. And I remember in following days, however, this is something I care very much about. If there is any New Yorker that is listening to me, I think I got an enormous sense of fraternity, of excuse me, because of enormous respect and tremendous admiration for the people that went through that and that showed the world. And this is where I really believe that this is the greatest motivation that you can still see now in lots of Americans. Like as I think that's a national trait. I think it's something that stems deeply from the admiring, and that's why I feel so much, and that's why I'm saying that I have my own opinion about the world, and that I will not equivocate what is right and what is wrong in my view. Right, that is the enormous spirit. That is not a cliche. This is not because they tore down the World Trade Center, and therefore we had to show that we're still here. It's really true. Like, historically speaking, the reaction that the New Yorkers, that the Americans, that the world entire that sided with them displayed on that day and the day after and days after, right? And that's a force that it's human, right? It's normal. But in moments of crisis, when you see what's really going wrong, and that really makes you see what is important in front of bullshit, right? Let's be honest about that. You roll up your sleeves and you go there, and you don't give a damn whether it's risky, whether it's you're going to lose something in the process. You just do it for your fellow neighbor, and that's a human value. If you wonder why civilization don't believe in people, they tell you that there is no civilization, such thing like civilization, that what we built in our world is an accident, right? It can be an accident in a measure, of course, in which everything could go differently, but yet in these possibilities, things went in a specific way. And the reason why they went in a specific way show a pattern where humans, generally speaking, improve and do their positive choice, and do manage to understand how to solve problems, how to fix them, to live in a better world. And the spectacle that America displayed on that occasion was seriously astonishing. Like, I saw even today, and that's why I want to address the topic, is that in 20 days a lot of things changed. That defeatism I'm talking about, that I see today, that day wasn't there, right? Today we see mistakes, sense of failure, of discomfort, of frustration, of denial, of hatred. The astonishment was there, the fear was there. That those are all natural reactions to what happened. It's obvious, it's human, it's natural. But these were all by far superseded by a spirit that I honestly had never seen before. If you listen to even to the heartbreaking phone calls, or all those messages that they launched from either from the planes, or from the burning towers, or wherever this thing happened, you see the spirit of a civilization. You see the confidence, the self-control, the courage, the pride, the consistency of a real human goodness, right? And this is something that I believe deeply as a Westerner to have been taught in great part by American culture. Right, and this is what I would like to stress, that not only in that people from my national, so you see, that wasn't, it was the greatest tragedy for Americans that day, but there were, of course, British, French, Germans, Italians, Irish, Polish, Arabs. They were, all religions were hit, all humanity was hit by that, right? It wasn't just a national thing. It wasn't this is where I also get pretty hard on the concept of geopolitics. This is not it, right? Politics is boundless. What happened that day was an attack to the roots of the values that made human civilization great, right? I consider as deeply inferior any other cultural values that could conceive to strike in such a fashion, right? I'm not commenting on what this attack was. I'm not making a political or strategical analysis. I'm not going to. It was an act of war, right? War is not what the men in uniform do with a formal war declaration that doesn't even exist anymore practically, but it's always remember this: war is defined like an act of violence. It can be everything, right? This is the Clausewitzian fluid way of seeing things, and I believe that the greatness that the West demonstrated in that day against whoever attacked the universal values of liberty, of racism, of respect of human life, right? And what was astonishing, there was an enormous display of real goodness of human civilization. And I truly, I say I'm getting emotional, as you heard before, but I truly tell you, I'm not shaken by anything. Like, again, when I read about, yes, I'm touched. If I read certain things, it happens every time, history to blow your mind in a sense. But this is truly, and I must confess this from the deepest of my heart, of my feelings, etc., that 9/11 is the thing that struck me the deepest, the most, for this positive value, not for the negative side of it, but for the trigger, for the reaction of this astonishing phase of capacity of reaction, of recovery, of resilience, of strength, of unity, of compassion. That is the greatest display of human goodness that I've ever seen in my life. And, well, things went on. I remember, eventually I had, from there on, it was a non-stop. Eventually, I fear, eventually with the military intervention, all these things, you can't debate all the time, right? There were very serious mistake being done, right? And I'm not talking about the general necessity of carrying out certain military operations. And specifically talking, I will arrive later to discuss this, to properly the strategical culture that lays behind. That is what is that went wrong. That is what is that 20 days after that can make people feel so defeated, right? And so as if this whole thing, all these that in enormous number, because this thing affected, aside from, it's not just Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever. This is something that, of course, impacted the world war. So we're talking about a million of people dead, right, or obliged to move from their home, or losing everything, and living through atrocious realities, losing much the integrity of their bodies, their minds, living in a terrible situation, right? So whatever happened, like, this is greater than naturally what happened on 9/11 per se, and it is something, however, that stems from it, and that stems from a decision. It stems from some problems that are not born with 9/11, are not born with the United States, are not born with the West, are not born with any specific identity, culture. They are born essentially with the obvious failures that humanity makes on its own path, in order that derive essentially from managing certain political and social realities that are extremely complex and complicated to understand, right? And that's why I talk about military history on the internet, not just because it's renowningly not studied enough, or it has, let's say, it's demonized, people have prejudices, and I think that this is, in fact, the cause of some mistakes. It is to say, and I would like to state this, and I don't give a damn about what other people think, but this is something I can say to Americans directly, and to any other person that lived in the hope that those who are responsibly in charge, so that their hopes frustrated and lost, and then and felt abandoned, and felt lied to, and felt left behind, because this is truly what happened, as you know, and that not to ever let yourself be brought down. This is something that our society has to learn in any of these situations, because the subjectivity of victory and defeat pass solely on your moral strength, right? You can go as far as saying that, yes, victories and defeat are solely subjective, There is what is not subjective is how many people died, how much you destroyed, how many things you did, and those pertain to reality, a reality that is also often difficult to understand, to reconstruct historically, and that's why people should first of all study what happened, and being honest about the mistakes, but also being honest about why these mistakes were carried out. So without any ideology, without any preconception, without saying, it's those damn Americans, it's those damn Muslims. This has nothing to do with that, right? Because reality, we know it from any, sensible level of learning that our civilization provide are dramatically more complex than this. And that while there are specific things that go wrong, these are never banal. They're never, they never stem from banal ideas such as, look at these people, blaming somebody because, a drone strike goes wrong, right? And what are have you ever thought about the alternatives? And have you ever thought about how many things go wrong in the same way that kill so many more people and nobody gives a damn about? So there is a disgusting amount of moralism that has absolutely nothing to do with morals by any stretch of the imagination, and especially has nothing to do with the dignity of the average human intelligence that we have to get rid completely out from here. As I was saying before, and actually I didn't tell it yet, is that what happened on that day made me feel as a European more, it made me feel American in part, right? I cannot say, of course, I come from another country, speak another language, I'm a European citizen. I owe my allegiance to other realities, right? And I already, this is kind of my business in the measure in which I also, it's a complex thing as well. So I would never say such thing that, because I feel for what happened so deeply that day that I can't share what people who were closer to it feel. But surely on that day, perhaps I understood more deeply than I had ever done, albeit having lived a childhood deeply imbued with American culture in everything, right? In products and movies and we all took part to it, right? In Western Europe since a long time before. And the rest of the world being gradually and unavoidably eventually penetrated by it, and as it should be, for better or for worse, because there are things that I can tell you that as a conservative I enormously appreciate a consistent part of American conservatism. I get inspired by it. I believe that the Constitution of the United States of America, together with the Swiss and the Liechtenstein one, is the single most beautiful constitution ever written, right? It expresses great part of the values in which I believe in, even if I live in a country that goes by with another constitution, other beliefs, another tradition, and so on. But on that day, I never felt more, let's say, close, never closer to American culture, to American people, and to American history as I have ever lived, also eventually, right, in spite of all the other things that happen. And this is something that, of course, we share in the measure in which we know better other cultures, right? The more you study about and the more you understand our people, the more you feel. I don't know much about the United States in general. I did study my share of things, made also, campaign battles, or the Battle of Brooklyn. Well, there is I will talk about American history in the future. You know that I started the Vietnam series also, so I generally speaking know things about, of course, American history, but let's say I specialize mostly in something completely different. Also, when, of course, not just the United States didn't exist, but also not our countries that existed. As a medievalist, I have other. But we all stem from there, and of course we share so much as we share with any other people in the world. But naturally, there is a closeness between the two shores of the Atlantic that are, consistent in the northern hemisphere, that cannot be denied. We stand, generally speaking, as also dominating culture. We are Europe emanated this, then eventually, America also taught Europe so much and gave Europe so much. Another thing that I can't, but that's something I consistently remember every day. I also made a video on June the 6th, speaking about the importance of studying military history for refining your moral capacities, and not, the chit chat in on the street about that country's bad, that country's good. That just proves that your level of mental deficiency, not even your ignorance, but probably level of stupidity. Unfortunately, those things go in parallel. But I consistently wake up every day thanking the fact that my country was defeated by the Western Allies during World War II, and that was liberated, and that my people partly redeemed itself and fought alongside. And as many other European countries, we are founded on the values of resistance and to tyranny and oppression, and therefore you may never thank enough those people who came from a completely different, a distant world, right? They didn't even think much of you in the first place, given that you had started a world war that surely proves nothing, in spite of today's apologism and minimization, especially among the youth culture, that is utterly disgusting towards Nazi fascism and their relative cultures, because those were the ones who created that and brought to I wish everybody had a grave. There was not even a grave for hundreds of millions of people, because frankly it didn't stop with World War II. Right? It's something that went wildly beyond with the world that we have known. The Cold War was actually hotly fought everywhere. The astonishing moral and material misery of communism, that ruined the history of half of European countries in an utterly unspeakable way, and this all we owe to people that maybe at the time there's nothing flattering about. Let's be honest about that. By this World War II, Americans were racist. There were eugenetic programs. We're not talking about people that you would like to meet today by your moral standards. Say, okay. But we have to these people gave their freaking lives for a cause, right? It's like the American Civil War, right? It's pure historical illiteracy to think something that, the Union countries were less racist than the Confederacy ones. But this doesn't have anything to do with the fact that they stood from really the right side, and they helped in improving the living conditions of millions of people and spreading further such motivations and fixing things at the end of the day. And I know that this is not, let's say, this is part of the reason why I speak today, because defeatism is a feeling that comes when your moral strength is low, right? And as I was saying before, I have no idea what it feels to be an American citizen. I appreciate what I see in many environments very much, but I also don't appreciate lots of things that happen in the United States, in Europe, or in any other country in the world for that matter. And I think that a lot of this defeatism has to do with ignorance, with historical ignorance, with also lack of responsibility. That is to say, we all have pros and cons. I think, the Americans have a dramatic level of democratic awareness, independently from what, many people also think within the same United States, and this is the problem in great part, but also in the rest of the world. And that's why before I was saying, never let yourself being brought down by these people. Never let yourself being told that you're intrinsically evil, that there is something beyond fixing in your own society. This is something that is being ridden consistently by a certain part of American politics today that is an anti-civilizational one, and that doesn't matter whether it does contain some instances of actual democratic and positive and civil points that stem from problems that are common, that are not being a Republican or a Democrat. It has to do with margination, poverty, lack of opportunity. These are universal problems, right? They have not to do with what side of the aisle you are, right? It's a myth to pretend that there are certain inherently privileged or racist or whatever morally wicked realities that fundamentally oppress others by color, by belief. But this is in fact an anti-civilizational value. But this is what is emerging apparently as a sort of. I don't believe in mainstreams, right? But this is the guys that shout the hardest, and they're backed by people that actually don't give a damn about that, but they are cashing for that, right? So there is a sense of defeatism that stems also from seeing the collapse of what it seemed that American civic religion that brought to the world an enormous displayed to the world an enormous moral standard, right? And that in spite of the hypocrisy, in spite of course things that went wrong, there was always something wrong, like in every country, right? And it's unrealistic to pretend that 300 millions of people with all the diversity, all the complexity of the system, all can't work perfectly together, everything's fine. America does have a heavy past. Slavery definitely was no joke, and lots of other dynamics that oppress the same people in general, and that you can't find easily in any other country in the world. But this has nothing to do with the astonishing work that the United States carried out in terms of democracy, of liberty, of hope. There are men and women that worked, that gave their lives for literally saving others. When I talk about the military, I don't talk about them because it's the American military, or it's about, yes, it is also about being the American military or the Belgian military or the Australian military. It has to do with, indeed, what your culture is about. And there are certain standards that are high in the war, some that are low. But it is, at the end of the day, again, about a human value. It's about a universal meaning, right? And that's why this doesn't stop with the United States. This doesn't stop with its allies. This doesn't stop with the Iraqis, with the Afghans, but not even with the Syrians or with the Ukrainians. We all are in this thing. And that's why it is dumb in the first place to presume that you can create just a dichotomy to judge what is happening in the world, because that's as stupid as you can observe even just by looking at a political map of the world throughout all its history, realizing that there is no such thing like two blocks, not even during the Cold War. If you think that during the Cold War there were two blocks, you're just an ignorant. Like, you had never studied the Cold War, you don't know what it is, right? And that's why I also talk about the Vietnam War. But there's no good and evil in a easy way, right? You can't, or at least on a national base, on a religious base. There are surely some trends. You can't ignore the fact that a Middle Eastern country has more issues than a Western country. It's stupid, but this has nothing to do with cultural racism or whatever. It's simply the reality of facts, of quality of life, of level of education, level of it's there, right? There is no, in the history of mankind, generally speaking, where things improve, they improve more or less at every level, right? There is hardly any, enormous imbalance in spite of the characteristics of any place. And you have to understand why those things happen as well. What makes the difference, what's really being, always presented with a challenge is what you do now, what you do at the moment, what you do to change but in the near future, at the moment, right, the next step you're gonna take, right, and when you feel defeated, when you feel that as if these 20 years of war were all lost in a brutal way, and the moral ego of that is going to be the only thing you're going to complain about even for valid reasons, because if things were mishandled, you have to definitely pursue the responsible, have to understand why things were screwed up, but why? Because you have to do better next time. You can't. It's not just about coming back on your feet. It's about being willing to give another fight, which doesn't mean it has nothing to do with starting other wars necessarily. But it's obvious that such heavily involved countries in the world, like not just the United States, but think about the NATO in general, and others, of course, that are constantly there, right? Doesn't matter what country you belong to. There is some of your special operation forces are out there doing something, killing somebody, right? That's how normally politics is made. And it is literally like a person killed by a bullet and a person killed by a lung cancer because state allowed cigarettes being sold. It's still a dead person, right? It is true that the implications are completely different, but still, if you're concerned about human life, and that's a human standard, you can't close one eye when this doesn't when somebody is killed, but not militarily speaking, right? Or not in front of you. It's obvious that if a place blows up, kills, I don't know, 30 people, that's easy to say, oh, look at that, it makes news. But what about all the people that die for all the economical mishandling or block of exports of dairy products or whatever? Nobody gives a fucking damn about that. That's how you have to exercise your moral sense. And when you study military history, you study politics, history in general, you realize that fixating with these details is basically you having no moral education whatsoever, because you simply have no scientific understanding of the world, how it works. So I also would like to say this, that naturally Schwerpunkt is open to everybody, but if you have preconceptionally anything about any country, you're better out of here, because nobody needs you here, right? You first of all need to educate yourself, and then maybe deal with participating with the rest of society, because that's what you make that really makes a difference in the world, right? Others can't do it for you when you sit there just complaining and doing nothing, right? And that's exactly what being a defeatist means. Because out of 100 people that complain, there's just one is actually actively doing something that helps, right? Roughly. And the others are just complaining. That means they're admitting their incapacity, their impotence, their powerlessness, right? And in the moment in which you say, wow, this is dramatic. Like I've heard from the United States certain positions that were maybe part even there of American culture, in a part of its tradition, about isolationistic behavior, right? That is also one of probably of the other single most stupid ideas that I've ever heard. Naturally, these are present everywhere. Like the typical, for example, anti-American moron is always the guy that says, the Americans invaded the other countries because they want oil. As if, being put on the ground in a country was something strange by civilizational standards. As if, that was the proof that by, going to another country for some reason, killing people for some reason, for example, destroying one of the most ferocious, infamous and disgusting regimes that existed up to that point, at one of Saddam Hussein, was something inherently, no, you didn't have to do it, man, because, it's better for those fucking Iraqis to be exterminated by a ferocious dictator than, sending some troop to knock him out, right? The problem at that point was not the dramatic mistake. The war was fine as far as I'm concerned. The problem was that we went there fundamentally without any kind of preparation, notoriously, about what would happen later on. Of course, without a poor, understanding of what Iraq and its culture, its background, its situation in general was. Without that, level of preparation. This stems from issues that have to do with the military doctrine over the years. With the lack, broadly speaking, we take our own responsibility as Westerners, meaning that this is what I say all the time on this channel, from a Clausewitzian perspective. There is a lack of strategic culture in the West, which means that Westerners do not study military history, and the reason why they don't do it is because there is some scarecrow that shouts that that war is terrible, war is horrible, look at this cluster bomb, as if being killed with a knife or with a bullet was anything different for that matter, like as if using gas for killing somebody was better than having a bayonet stuck in your gas, right? We are at level of mental deficiency that tell you how much people truly do not study war, right? War is not reading books written by opinionists or journalists or historians with no specific military strategic education to tell you more or less what that war was, and not even understanding the military logic of why, a division was employed somewhere rather than another, and not even giving a damn because you say those were not important. Of course, there is a political mandate that you should understand, for which the military instrument obeys. But you have to understand war for what it is, from a strictly military point of view, if you want to understand why certain things screwed up, right? Also militarily, and also primarily politically, but first and foremost observing what the military is made of and what it does when it's there, right? And even in this doesn't mean that the military is always doing the right things at all, or that properly every person belonging to any human group is always doing something bad or good because they belong to it. It has nothing to do with that. This has to do with properly understanding the difficulties, the challenges, the problems, anything that emerges from the contact with the real world, especially on such a large scale of events, and drawing a capacity to be able to read it on the base of practice, right? The reason why there is this lack is not much the fact that, that we don't study war per se. War, first of all, is something done, right? The West does have the best military in the sense that we are properly, from a doctrinal point of view, the most advanced powers in the world, right? China is a paper tiger. Russia, it's already something that if it can't keep anything together with some decent military standard, it's not about their military quality. There is nothing of greater strategical content than what they have, right? There's nothing ideologically superior in other countries compared to a Western failure, right? It's a political problem. And it is all the more meaningful the more you consider, in fact, how much we have and how much we make things work. But when we screw with up everything with a lack of civic participation to such choices. This is also not to say that you have to lower the guard thinking that we will always have those means, that we will always be in the condition of carrying out certain actions, that we can always fix things. No. The last 20 years proved that there's things that can't be fixed. Nothing can be fixed. It's a physical law to which we are doomed. Like, everything is going to fall apart at some point. Everything on this world, right? Not everything shall pass, but everything properly doesn't have the physical capacity to stick together for more than a certain amount of time. But this is exactly the reason why we are to constantly invest resources and hard work and commitment and will, in fact, in these endeavors, such as national security and for what the military is supposed to exist in the first place, right? And then, once again, being boots on the ground on somebody else's soil, right? It's not a big deal by itself. Right, it needs to be contextualized in what the situation is, right, and never be fooled by people who say that you should freeze your willingness to recur when it's needed to the military instrument, because that is wrong. Because those people are not much more mentally evolved than a Taliban, right? They're not much more dogmatic, open-minded in terms. Properly, that's a dogma. You see, that's not. It derives from ignorance. This is a process that we are all living in a certain sense. That is to say, the West got fat and rich, right, mostly in the second half of the 20th century. And as a consequence, we lower the guard. We say, okay, well, but then we have resources to fix things. We're an organized society. So the individual lost momentum. They said, all the things we could have now, like 20 years, if 20 years they had told us what we have now in terms of, for example, of technological application and things we could do, like 20 years ago, we would have gone nuts about it. We would have loved to have it, to use it, to hyper use it. What happened is actually we don't give a damn. Education, available information, all what can be now easily achieved with no work whatsoever, just with a dramatic ease. Before was a dream, and today, what do we complain about? You know what we complain about, right? Open like any, switch on TV. In any country, they're factually non-news. They're not information. They're just basically a chronicle of a bunch of stuff that can be more or less thought-provoking for people, naturally with a specific aims, subtle, ideologism behind it, and that's it, right? You're not informed about the serious things, about the big numbers, big dynamics of us with a scientific background from informed people, from competent people. So there's no other way out of this. You have to do it by yourself, right? You have to improve your own capacity. You don't have to be intimidated. Because if you listen over and over again that it's done and that we're doomed, that everything is going to work, you have already lost, because you have not passed on the offensive yet. You have not resumed the offensive, even after a hard blow. You're just sitting there, licking your wounds, but effectively doing nothing else. But all this flow to pass over you, and to remain passive, and to start thinking that after all, maybe I shouldn't, think about something else. What do you think that all these advertisements, all these, the general trend that information economics is aimed, after all, is showing you that you can live with this kind of cheap, quick, immediate thing, because it doesn't require any application for you, right? There are people out there who think that they have a job that allows them to get some food, and then they go out and take yoga lessons. They go out, I don't know, tracking, and that's their lives, right? Meeting up with a friend and not giving a freaking damn about consistently anything that has any kind of scientific, comprehensive care or understanding about this world. If in Europe here, I can tell you, I speak with lots of Europeans all the time from other countries. There is complete ignorance about these facts. That is to say, they know that they exist, but any factual application to say, okay, let's try to explain certain processes, because, basing ourselves on evidence and sources, on understanding that there are also various degrees of interpretation we should be careful about, who says things and how, there is none. Right, I think that reading fiction is fundamentally being an intellectually developed person, or I don't know, having just there is other terrifying behavior that I've met mostly in that is spreading a bit everywhere. Is typical of post-socialists or crypto-socialists too, because this is spreading, in fact, also in the West. Paranoia of that you can't factually criticize a human being. If that human being wants just to do that thing, nobody should care. Which cuts away completely any kind of moral responsibility, any kind of discipline, any kind of, in fact, accountability of responsibility meant properly from a civic point of view. But the idea that if you're just a slob that does nothing because you like doing nothing, you should be pressured by society to become something. We know that human beings are not what they should be. Something just, eating chips on a sofa until they grow fat and die. What's their application? Why don't we want to aim at a greater level of education, something much more consistent, properly from an investment point of view? I was just talking today with a fellow subscriber. We're saying, even the means through which certain realities are boosted in the union, etc., are just, we pay money to you. Then what money, where this money ends, we don't care, as long as you escape the Russian orbit, right? And then maybe what happens in these countries? They accumulate an enormous debt, passing from social, for socialistic reality to neoliberalistic one, without order, without structure, without anything, and so that they become, I don't know, the next country that will go default and that will see lose part of its sovereignty, in a way that those people have factually not even understood. Right, without any chance to a political participation, any chance to I love the European Union, by the way. That's also actually a pragmatic way of acting, because we don't have the structures today to knock at somebody's door and saying, what are you actually doing with the money we gave you, right? We base of national deficit that is based also, an absolute quantity of debt and the level of GDP, right? So it's something also that is worrying now, because the West, is not growing as much as before in relative terms, but also in absolute terms, and compared especially with all the emerging countries that will come to, that are absolutely not any better in terms of education or whatever. They come even from a worse background in that sense, and will come to agitate the world further, given that they will also grow into consistent powers, as they already are. Think about Brazil, think about India, think about Russia itself. I mean, very different realities. Of course, we can't compare them properly, but let's say, meaning that we all have problems, and these problems are going to increase because we have achieving this enormous amount of wealth, but our society haven't developed the means to control it, to regulate it yet, to discipline it, to channel it, right? And this is the challenge of the next generations, and without a structured, massive education, we're not talking about literacy. We're not talking about making a kid staying in school for 13 years and pretending that hasn't by itself anything to do with having formed an intellectually mature human being. Here we're talking about even decades of specific formation that can be naturally mixed with studying, work, etc., but with a specific aim that has to develop that person, not just to be thrown out there in the wild of a simply unregulated market without, say, good luck to you, just making this person becoming a nomad without any safe prospect. No, this has nothing to do with maintaining people. That has also, as you understand, nothing to do. It's simply using exactly the same amount of wealth we have now, but with much more strict regulations for people to be pressured to perform well at the beginning of their life. We don't invest in childhood. We do not invest in adolescence, right? We give for granted that schools, do their work. They don't. We are creating just an astonishing mass of radically underschooled individuals. Being born in the West, that is truly the best, has nothing to do with being an educated person by the civilizational and moral standards that we need to make things work in the third millennium. Not even by any stretch of the imagination. If you go to school in the West, you're not educated about your country, you're not educated about its history, you're not educated about economics, you're nothing. You know nothing about this world. You're no one, for real. And this is the greatest wealth that we have. Young minds are the greatest investment. A young human brain is something that you can multiplicate in an incredible scale its capacities, and that's the single greatest field of investment for any sensible civilization, and we don't give a freaking damn about that. A freaking damn. And when I think about this all, I realized that it's a bit fighting against windmills, right? Because you can't really stem a process of this magnitude, right? As I say before, it's not just about studying von Clausewitz without context. In order to understand, to have a real strategic culture, you should be spending your entire life studying campaigns, battles, and studying the Concrete, having, kind of a historical, philosophical, linguistical background. It's obvious that we can't transform the world in anything like this, but at least the people who are in charge should have this. And let's be honest, nor military historians, nor the military has this capacity today. We addressed this, that here we should descend into a bit of a further Clausewitzian theory, but we've already seen what the issue is that, first of all, in order to know how to fight a war, you should fight wars, right? And when, politically speaking, these wars are just, randomly launched, or they do not have a clear objective, because that's also the lack of strategic education, or they are short term, because you're in fear to remain longer there, right? Look at Afghanistan. What happened, right? It's not that the war had lasted forever. It's just that that was the American presence there. Like it was not heavier than other military presence. I don't know. Think about South Korea, whatever. In a dramatically strategic context of Central Asia, this thing was not like even of all the implications to brought to for the withdrawal. There was still of course a dramatically better way to do this that was handed ridiculously. Why is this done? This is a political problem, right? It's not because of the but the military in all this kind of loses experience, kind of loses the possibility of really being employed for the purpose that it's designed for. Right, think of being a military man. I'm sure among you there is someone that, and I know by fact actually, what it feels like when your state, you're trained the way you are, for the professional that you are, and you're employed by your state in a fashion that is not up to the level of your preparation, of your training, etc. Von Clausewitz itself says that the best military experience by far in terms of eventual practical replicability of that is direct war. That is to say, you have to fight, be in direct command. Right? We're talking about officers here, but we're not talking about soldiers per se. We're talking about those who have to think strategically, ever greatly in the hierarchy. Right? But also in the absence of that, advisors. Somebody is always out there in a way or another, but also think about the spread of mercenarism that has gone on dramatically in the last decades. That's also, we have seen this pattern in the past, and we know that that wasn't particularly good for the, at least it was not an extreme. I have nothing against that, morally speaking. It's just, the question should be, why did this happen? And if the reason is that you basically entrusted those people tasks that you're not willing to entrust your military anymore, that's a political problem that weakens your military at the same time, and it can't be motivated, right? Even rationally, right? There are things that just contractors can do in a sense, and with much less risk, etc. But here we're talking properly of a broader capacity that you have to exploit certain situations, even to provide your military with adequate experience. And surely we all have. I'm not saying here that as we're saying before now, a defeat is equating to that, right? There are very high military standards involved, not just in the American Armed Force, but the whole of NATO, that is by far the strongest military alliance ever seen in the history of mankind. But aside from this, the idea is that at home, in your culture, and exactly because the problems are mainly political, you have to cultivate a strategic education. You have to more or less make people understand that the military instrument is always an option, even if you don't want that. That is to say, it's not something inherently bad that you should refrain from using, right? Even if objectively war is most of the times not a good idea, but it's not a good idea most of the times because it is intrinsically wars as it's just an instrument, right? What is wrong with wars is why they are fought, not the fact that they are wars, right? Why and how they're fought, right? But that's exactly the point. Until you don't know how to fight those wars and for which purpose, you will always screw up, right? And you will always undermine somebody's, the same military, but the community altogether, belief in themselves. And that's why this defeatism is kind of an obvious consequence. Because if you remember what happened on 9/11 and you realize what happened throughout all these 20 years and all the people who died, what happened, the question is really, was this really for nothing? Well, the question that is important is that how willing you are to fix the situation now, because that's the only thing that you have. And in order to fix the situation, to improve it, you should always work, stay always alert, being always ready at every moment if it is needed by actually a good situation that allows that a military instrument to be applied, so in a way that is not generally the quickest, as war is most of the time, but once that is properly designed and that is strategically envisaged as being fitting and necessary, useful, right? Necessary is also an anti-Clausewitzian concept, but it's exactly because it stresses the individual responsibility and capacity of strategical analysis. Of course you should. And the first thing you have to do, if you really love your country, if you really love your culture, if you love the world, if you love humanity, human rights, civil rights, the first thing you have to do is coming back at your post and being ready to launch the next offensive. Being ready doesn't mean you have to do it, but you always have to know how much your liberty is worth, how much that humanity is worth. In the moment in which you give up, it's because you're giving up the things you believe in. It's because you're giving up the same values by which you had thought to change the world in that sense. And it's not necessarily, you see, mistakes are done at the top all the time. Leadership is crucial in all this, right? Command is, as we've seen, the place where the greatest strategic culture should be. But you as a community should never give up entirely. And I know it's hard to hear this, because how can you say this to people who lost their family in a terrorist attack, or in war broadly meant? The things are actually the same. And you say, I've lost like a part of me, and this will never be fixed. Yes, but you can always, right? Even if it was for a minimal thing, you can always do it better. You can that loss will never be replaced, and there is nothing that can be done. That's again quite simply, I'm using this picture today because that loss will never ever be replaced. But if you love so much what you have lost, which we really do, because we all do after what happened, the greatest thing you can do, the best thing you can do for yourself as well as for whom you've lost, is to stand up again and to fight again, and never giving up and recovering all your moral forces, because those are the ones that keep you strong, that keep you motivated, that keep you want to fix the issue and keep you want to do the next thing next, right? The military knows this. The military knows what it means to be employed in this sense, frustratingly, and knowing what it means to see a person being killed next to you shared, the main, years of your service with, and that you that will never be replaced. But those people know that that's their job. That's the only way some things are solved, right? When the military instrument is needed to be employed, and it is always needed to be employed. And this is the same thing that should be thinking a diplomat or a politician or a president of the United States. And the only way for these people to realize this is to be as motivated, as morally strong, as educated, as informed, as competent as they can be. And there is no other way out of this, right? So this is, I say, to anybody really who feels as if this was all worthless, as if this was just the greatest mistake, as if we should just feel guilt and accepting to be blamed. That behind how things went, things go wrong many times, right? But and we always can make the difference, as I just said, I always say in my videos. But this has not only to do with you. It has to do with a world, with a reality. It has to do with other people that are fighting against you, right? And when you are defeated, it can be the worst. It can be the worst. We all know. I can't imagine what it means to even reach certain amounts of losses, or to be pressured, or seeing a society feeling as if it was torn apart by this so deeply. as just, I think, for an American, or for anybody who is like, think about the Afghans now, and what they're suffering, those women that are going in the street with enormous guts to say those motherfuckers that they're a bunch of criminals and nothing else. Think about what that freaking means, right? When you're sitting there calmly, comfortably, without having to deal with any of this shit. That is the worst thing you can feel. That to be deprived of your future, of your liberty, of your rights, of your happiness. Those are things that should motivate any person in the world to make something better for them. And this must be done with any mean possible. Because that's the only way to be a moral person. Because if you start crossing out certain means, you are automatically refusing to accept reality for what it is. And this can't be. So, believe in yourself. Because if there is something so great, humankind, as you can't see, and I think about anybody, of all the firemen, of the police workers, or everybody who helped that on 9/11 in the following days, and all the people who have worked to fix the solution, to go strike, to take out that son of a bitch that projected all of this, and that, it doesn't matter that, I don't know, for political reasons, again, I don't know, the Americans even backed Al-Qaeda in the Syrian war because they needed at some point certain strategic means to be, certain objectives to be reached. That's reality, and that's part of that what we're talking about. This is not about individually, categorizing. This is about making justice with the means available and with what reality presents you with. And you will fail, but failure is exactly what gives you the strength to fix. That's the greatest thing of mankind. As once again, 9/11 proved that doesn't matter how hard the blow can be, you can always learn from that, standing up and passing on offensive once again. This is humanity. This is what differentiates us from anything. That's why we have a morality. That's why we are responsible. That's why we can, again, always do better. And life by itself is like this, that life will bring you down. At some point you will fail. We will all die miserably. It's no nice story. It's, even if we try to conceal that, to exorcise that, that's how it happens. We're all struggling for something, and we see failure constantly, all the time. We experience it. It brings us down. But what really matters is how much we're motivated to resume the struggle and to then make it at the end of the day. And the more you do that, and the more you'll see that you will be able to invest yourself much more greatly in many other greater endeavors and accomplishing much better results, right? So never be, if you believe in something, if you have thoroughly thought about that, if you are okay with your conscience for having sorted out what reality approximately forces you to, at that moment, to achieve, go at the fullest with that. Don't give up. Don't be uncertain. Don't pursue your objective, right? And always be in control. And never stop believing in yourself, because if you believe in yourself, you can achieve much more than anybody who truly doesn't. Even it doesn't matter how rich they are, how prepared they are. You may have all that, but if you don't have moral forces, you cannot win, right? Cancel from your mindset. It's wealth, it's technology. It has nothing to do with that. It's how much you want that and how much you're willing to make it happen. And the reason why you get defeated, more often than not, has to do with this. Has to do with the fact that you may have been even thoroughly involved, as we have been in all this, but not having done enough. For laziness, for also for problems that occurred that we were not, up to that point we wouldn't know how that we would have had to face, for lack of preparation for anything, and naturally for somebody from the other side that is countering us, and that we have to understand if we want to defeat, if we want to properly bring down, and if we think that we are really morally superior, as we are. And this is the only mindset that wins. In the moment in which we abandon that mindset, we lose. So instead of then crying on ourselves, right? And once we have honored the victims, we have cherished their memory, we have, and it's, I know it's hard. It's the worst thing. It's the thing that nobody would like to ever experience in our lives. But having accepted, having processed all the pain, all the astonishing sense of loss, or the sense of injustice, of lack of orientation that these tragedies make us realize that there is always a meaning, and that this meaning is up to us to take on the initiative again, right? We have to really be convinced about what we're doing, and we can't be convinced about lots of things if we don't want to face reality, if we don't want to study history, if we don't want to know other people, if we don't want to expose ourselves, right? I know it's hard today because there is somebody, this is the point, there is somebody who is telling you that this is not possible, that you have failed because you're evil, that there is something inherently wrong, it should be destroyed, that is evil. That is exactly because it's the anti-civilizational value. It's an idea, it's not a single individual, a single group or whatever. It is the enemy of all goodness, of all civilization. That is the one that tells you to let go, to give up. And therefore, never be intimidated, never fear to speak up your mind. Doesn't matter how costly that. Of course, that should be an appreciation of that. There must be a strategical thing. You have to stay alive once again. But all the time, you have the possibility, in a realistic sense, in a reasonable sense, just to stand up to your principles, to say, no, I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up this inch right in front of me because somebody thinks that, I'm a loser, I've done something right. You know that what you're doing is good because you have been raised well. You know what the true values are. You know how to respect people, how to act intelligently. You have a conscience. You have a very powerful indicator within yourself that makes you feel when you do something wrong, and that is meant to make you feel like that when you do something wrong, so that you don't do that mistake again. But it's meant not for you to withdraw, but to go further on with that acquired knowledge. Well, not just stand your ground, but just go forward, go ahead, take the initiative once again, because that's the first thing, right? And that will not ensure victory. It has never done by itself, but surely it's the only way to be able to pretend that you can achieve victory, right? And remember that victory and defeat are subjective, because it is about how much great the value of what you believe in and what you can accomplish again really is. So there is never an end, right? There is never, like in history, like a war that is, first of all, there is no war that you cannot win. This is another bullshit that people put out there, that know that there are certain countries that can't be conquered. That's probably the most asinine, in terms properly of strategic education, military art and history, the thing that you can't properly say. Nobody is beyond defeat. Nobody. Everybody can be defeated. Every single war can be won. That has to do on how much you're determined to win it. Right? And it's the most difficult thing. It's no magic formula. You say, okay, well then now I think I'm determined, and then no, because fighting these things will bring you down, because reality will bring you down. And it takes a lot of work, a lot of exercise, a lot of confidence to go on. It's the hardest thing, right? And never be tricked, never be fooled again by somebody who says that it's something inherent, it's something absolute, it's technology, it's culture. It's bullshit, right? It's humanity that makes the difference. And humanity is meant to go out there doing stuff and achieving stuff, and that's a victorious humanity. And remember always this, that the gates of hell shall not prevail. As long as humanity exists, civilization will win. It's what history shows us, that the moral weakness, right, of somebody who is going to shut music, was preventing women from living their lives, from having an education, from being happy. A person that prohibit themselves intelligence are inferior because they made that choice. That is what constitutes their own inferiority, because a person who does this denies the words of civilization, and you know that they will lose in the end. And all it takes is you, however, to do the thing, to speed up the process, right? This doesn't mean that they will always lose, but they will, because you will defeat them, right? Because you will have always to defeat no matter what. But the world will crush them, because human nature cannot cope with this. Human nature is programmed to do something else. But you have the power to help lots of other people in the meanwhile to live their lives, to recover hope, to believe that all this has not been in vain. And I promise you that all this has not been in vain. Nothing has ever been in vain. Because we live by the mistakes we do. Because without them, we could never improve. We could have never built all of this. So this is meant to happen. And this is not the end yet. But always remember this, that the gates of hell shall not prevail against us. And this is the greatest moral force that we can ever acquire. And we will just have to go out there and fight. And fight with all our means. By speaking up, by not being intimidated, by reacting to oppression, to tyranny, by wiping out, when we have the means, those who are threatening other people's lives. That is good. Killing a terrorist because it's going to blow up and killing other people is something sincerely good. There is nothing wrong in killing a person that is threatening to kill other people. You're completely okay with that. That's simply human intelligence, and that's what we have always to struggle for. And remember, they are inferior. They are inferior to us because they are stupid. They don't have enough moral force. Their civilizational structure are primitive. They don't work. They are rigged. They don't hold, right? They're just doomed to crumble at some point. But there are people suffering in the meanwhile. And it's righteous to fight for their liberty. And this is what we will always do. So I stop here. That this is a promise for everybody, that as long as you believe in yourself, humanity will reward you, right? And humanity shall be victorious. And I want to just by last, spend, in fact, really a last thought to all the people who lost their lives in this, right? In all what happened, not just for what the last. You see, you can't really detach the last 20 years from anything else. Just saying, it started with 9/11. No, it's not like that. This is part of a broader history that we must know. That doesn't start again, as I was saying, with this or that country, this or that culture, this or that religion. This is humanity. And if you don't understand humanity, as we just said, you cannot make it. And this is the only way you can honor those who have sacrificed themselves for doing something, for making this world better, right? And for helping genuinely. And bringing us where we wouldn't be able to think it was possible, because that's the truth. Is that's why those people make mistakes. That's why those people are stupid. Those people are uncivilized because they don't know what civilization is. We know, so we have to show them. And this is no joke. We really should export democracy. There is really nothing wrong with that. Whoever has problems with that is a problem for civilization. What is a problem when you want to export civilization without the adequate competence and preparation that is needed. And this is valid for everybody. It's not an American thing. It's not a Western thing. It's valid for literally everybody. It's how the Russians thought they could turn, an Islamic tribal reality into a socialist state. It's how the same were thinking that, now that they can rule their own country from the top of their own, in capacity. It's various degrees of problem that we all have as human communities, and that we have, however, the capacity to fix together. So I don't know how this video turned out. I hope that this was somewhat insightful and that it made any sense, because I really don't believe there is a limit to the way you can do better, right? So, but it's not often stated and reiterated, right? Because if you think negatively, you will act negatively. If you think positively, you will definitely make it, right? And this is, it really stems at the roots of human civilization. So for now, I just hope that you're going to do well. This is the important thing. Remember that it's in your, it's all upon you, right? And you are the only one that can make the difference for yourself and for others, right? The others will do things, have cooperate, etc. But it starts from you. It doesn't start from other guys or that guy, or it starts from you. So I wish you all the best to make it, right? And to not fear to make mistakes, not to be brought down, because that's the moment in which you have the opportunity to act upon your own mistakes, to fix them, to make it better. And without that knowledge, you wouldn't be able to do it. You would just fail again. So this is not going to be. So I thank you a lot for listening to me. I hope that you're doing great, and I'll see you next time. Bye.